Today I am bringing you my January reading wrap-up, and I'm going to start by saying I read too many books in January, or I finished too many books in January, because two of the books that I finished I actually started towards the end of December. I also had one DNF and there were a few continuations in series that I read, so I don't want to talk about all of these books in loads of detail in this video. As usual, I will have timestamps in the description just in case you would like to skip around, but the first few books I'm just going to give like a very brief synopsis and some top level thoughts, especially the books where I've already talked about them in other videos. So first up we have Gardens of the Moon by Steven Erikson, which I have left on the shelves. Let me just grab it. I do have a spoiler-free review for this book. If you would like to check it out, I will leave that linked in the cards and in the description. I enjoyed this a lot more than I was expecting. I gave it like a 3.5 stars overall. I really liked the world and the scope of the world and how big and immersive it felt. I didn't love the character writing, and also there were parts where I was a little bit frustrated, especially towards the end. There was like a situation that felt a little bit anticlimactic. But yeah, if you want my full thoughts, I will leave that review linked. I do plan on continuing the series. I'm going to pick up the second book in February, hopefully. I also finished Heir of Fire by Sarah J. Maas. This is the third book in the Throne of Glass series. I started this towards the end of December and I finished it the first week of January. Again, really enjoyed this, my favourite book in the series so far, and I'm currently 100 pages into Queen of Shadows, which I am also loving, except for one element which I can't talk about because of spoilers, but this has something that really makes my skin crawl and I don't like it, but also I think there is a purpose to it being included, and yeah, I was not okay at the end of this book. Let's just leave it at that. I also finished Paris Hilton's memoir, which I believe is just called Paris the Memoir. This really surprised me. I had no idea what Paris Hilton went through as a teenager and how she was sent to various facilities that were aimed at troubled teens. Really appreciated how open and honest she was about that. So yeah, no rating for this because it's non-fiction, but it was really interesting and I would recommend it if you have any interest in it. Next up I read Days at the Morisaki Bookshop by Satoshi Yagisawa. This one I gave 3 stars. It felt very mundane and slice of life. We're following a woman who starts working in her uncle's bookshop after finding out that her boyfriend was cheating on her and is now engaged to someone else. I wanted it to be more about the bookshop and working in a bookshop, but it wasn't really. Like, it felt very surface level in the way that it was approaching its themes. It's more about this family and the people that they interact with. So yeah, 3 stars. The audiobook was really easy to listen to. It felt like 2 short stories in one book, and I think if either of those stories had been fleshed out a little and had actually been the entire book, then I probably would have enjoyed it more. I also read The Goodbye Cat by Hiro Arikawa, which is a collection of short stories. This is also kind of a companion book to The Travelling Cat Chronicles, which is one of my favourite books of all time. I think it's the last 2 short stories are connected to The Travelling Cat Chronicles and there's a crossover of characters. The final line of the final short story made me sob and I was holding it together up until that point and then it broke me. So yeah, would really recommend this if you have read The Travelling Cat Chronicles or if you have a love of cats. I think a lot of cat owners will really relate to these short stories. Would recommend reading this after The Travelling Cat Chronicles though. Okay, so those are the books that I don't really have strong feelings about and that I didn't feel like I really had much to say about. We are now going to move on to some more in-depth reviews. Not that any of my reviews are like super in-depth, but we're going to start with the book that I DNF'd this month. And this one I was so upset about because the cover is so adorable, and from the synopsis I thought I was going to love this. But I DNF'd The Baby Dragon Cafe by A.T. Qureshi. I put this down around the 15% mark because it wasn't what I was expecting and it wasn't what I was wanting. This is pitched as a cozy fantasy and it's been compared to Legends and Lattes. It might as well be a contemporary romance, except the main character happens to run a cafe for baby dragons. I assumed when I heard Baby Dragon Cafe, I thought this was going to be like a cat cafe where the baby dragons live there permanently and people, you know, go along and they have their coffee while the baby dragons are, you know, like playing and interacting with them. But no, it's more like a dog dog-friendly cafe, except instead of dogs, it's baby dragons that are allowed to go there. A lot of this didn't make sense because dragon owners do have insurance in case their dragons destroy something, but that insurance doesn't really cover much, and so the main character was having to pay out of her own pocket to fix stuff that these baby dragons were destroying, and I just couldn't get past that. I thought, how does this make any sense? Like, why is this woman trying to run this cafe when it's just like a money pit that she is just sinking all of her money in? I couldn't understand it, and I get that it was intentional for the setup for the plot. Basically, she meets this guy and he offers to pay her some money to train his baby dragon, and she loves baby dragons, and so she agrees to do it. And also she needs a new coffee machine because another baby dragon destroyed it and she can't afford a new one because the insurance doesn't cover it, and I don't get that. Because this was giving me more of a contemporary romance vibe rather than a fantasy vibe, I wanted something like Legends and Lattes, and this wasn't going to give it to me, so I DNF'd it. I thought the dialogue and the writing also was quite simple, and it would have been an easy listen. I did listen to the audiobook for this, but I knew it probably wasn't going to get higher than a 3 stars, and so I didn't want to waste my time trying to get through it. Next up we have Everyone in My Family Has Killed Someone by Benjamin Stevenson, and this is where I realise I listened to a lot of audiobooks in January because I also listened to this one on audio, and I really enjoyed that experience. I think with this type of narrative I wouldn't have enjoyed it as much reading it physically because the narrator, or the main character, breaks the fourth wall quite a lot, and that's not something that I typically like. However, it worked as an audiobook because I just felt like I was listening to this guy tell me this story. We're following a guy called Ernest Cunningham, and he is attending his family reunion. The book opens with like a list of the 10 commandments of a murder mystery. So these are the 10 rules that you should stick to if you want to write a successful murder mystery. In the first chapter, he even says to you, okay, like one of the golden rules is that I can't be an unreliable narrator. So I'm going to be completely upfront with you, and I'm going to tell you that there is going to be a death in this chapter, in this chapter, in this chapter, and in this chapter. It's almost like foreshadowing, except that he's telling you directly, and it was a very unique book. I did not see the resolution of the mystery, but obviously there are points where he tells you, oh, this is going to be important for later, so you should remember this, and oh, we're going to be back here some point later in the book, and this is the room where I actually solve the mystery, and it was very clever. The tone I don't think is going to work for everyone. I didn't love the humour at times. I felt like it became a little bit tedious. Listening to the audiobook though, I really appreciated how, I think it was chapter 4.5, there's like a point where he pauses and he says, look, I'm gonna recap everything that we've gone through so far because I know you bought the audiobook, and so you might be struggling to understand, like, you know, who everyone is. There's a lot of characters, and I really appreciated that little recap, and yeah, just the way that this was told. I will be continuing the series because even though this mystery wraps up in this book, there is a sequel, and I think there's also a Christmas special. I'm assuming there's also going to be more books in the series, and yeah, I will probably listen to them on audiobook because I did really like the narration. Next up, I read Butter by Asako Yuzuki, and the first thing I want to tell you about this book is that it's too long. It is 450 pages, I think, and it didn't need to be that long. You could have told this story in probably 350 pages, so it did drag at times and I struggled with the pacing. I also think that this has been mismarketed in a way. Even if you look at the cover and you see these bloody fingerprints, it makes you assume that this is going to be a thriller or a horror or a mystery or a crime novel, and it's not really any of those things. Like, it has elements of those things, even though there is a mystery, that's not really the focus of the book. So in this, we are following a main character called Rika, and she is a journalist. She's the only female journalist, I think, at her company, and she is desperately trying to get an interview with this woman called Monako Kaji, who is trying to appeal her conviction. So she was convicted of conning and killing a bunch of men who, some of them were quite a bit older than her, and she met them through a dating app, and it said that she conned them out of loads of money to live her lavish lifestyle, and then she killed them. This case gained a lot of attention initially actually, because Minako Kaji ran a food blog where she talked about gourmet cooking. I would describe this as literary fiction about societal pressure and also loneliness. I really appreciated the characterization in this. I thought the characters were really well developed and they were interesting, even though you're not meant to like them at times. What I really appreciated actually is how there are subtle shifts in the narrative where your perspective changes and where your feelings towards certain characters changes, and I really liked that. I did really like the way that this was written. There's a lot of visceral imagery, especially there's a lot of descriptions of food. It's also written deliberately to make you feel uncomfortable. It's not that the book is fatphobic, but there are characters in this who make fatphobic comments. So I just wanted to mention that as a content warning. I also think if you have any triggers relating to food or disordered eating, then again, wouldn't recommend this one. But yeah, I'm glad that I read it, even though I don't know whether it's going to stick with me long term. I mean, this cover is iconic. I think these characters are going to stick with me, but yeah, it is more of a character driven story rather than being like plot driven or anything like that. The Favourites by Layne Fargo is the next book on my list. This is a new release. It only came out in January. I read an arc through NetGalley, and when I finished it, I was going to give it 5 stars. However, I think I'm leaning more towards a 4 or a 4.5 because it was very dramatic and angsty, and that's not really my kind of thing. I had a few issues with the ending as well. It was a little too much for me, but there were multiple moments throughout the book where I was literally gasping because of what was happening. It was very entertaining. It's also very much inspired by Wuthering Heights. So we're following Kat and Heath, who were Olympic figure skaters. It's now been 10 years since their final skate, where a scandal happened and a documentary is being made about them. So you have these interviews with various people alongside this main narrative told from Kat's perspective, and you're seeing literally their entire relationship. Their relationship is very much at the heart of the story. They were very young when they met and when they started skating together. Kat is very driven and she loves skating, whereas Heath loves Kat, and it's very interesting, like their dynamic and the way that they kind of push and pull each other. I thought Layne Fargo did a very good job of building the tension. You can tell that she's previously written thrillers, because even though this isn't a thriller, there were times where I was on the edge of my seat. It was fast paced, it kept me wanting to turn the page, and that is why I'm giving it like a 4 to a 4.5. I think if you do like Taylor Jenkins Reid's books, then this could really work for you. Next up, I read James by Percival Everett, which is a reimagining of The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, a book that I have not read. As a standalone story, I thought it was really compelling, beautifully written, and the narration on the audiobook was also fantastic. It drew me in and it made me feel invested. In this, we are following James, who is a slave, and he finds out that he is about to be sold and separated from his wife and daughter. He decides to run away and very quickly runs into Hook, who is a boy from the same town, and Hook is also running away. However, he has faked his own death, and James immediately thinks, well, I can't go back now, because as well as being a runaway slave, they are now also going to assume that I'm a murderer. So it's about Hook and James going on this journey, and it's about how James is trying to survive and trying to think of a way that he can be reunited with his wife and daughter. James, the way that he interacts with various people, it's written in a very specific way, because the way that he interacts with white people, he's trying to protect himself, and so there's a lot of discussions on language and how we perceive intelligence based on the way that someone talks. I think I would have appreciated this a little more if I had read The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, because obviously this deviates from that because we're following James rather than Hook, and from what I understand, The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn follows Hook. I think having that context maybe would have meant this felt like a full 5 stars, but as it was, I'm giving it 4.5 stars and I would recommend it. Even if you haven't read The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, I still really enjoyed it and I'm really glad that I read it. Would definitely be interested in reading more books by Percival Everett. The final book that I have to talk about is Anibot by Sierra Greer, and this is marketed as science fiction. It was in the science fiction category of the Goodreads Choice Awards last year. However, I would describe this as literary fiction. It's a character study. The only reason I think it's got that science fiction label is because it's also about AI. We're following this main character, Annie, who is an AI robot. And the way that the world has kind of developed, you now have 3 different types of AI robots. You have cleaning robots, you have nanny robots, and you have cuddle bunnies is what they're called. And Annie is a cuddle bunny. So she was made for her owner, Doug, and she is essentially his girlfriend. So it is this character study told from the perspective of Annie, who you very quickly learn is in an abusive relationship, or at least to us as the reader, it feels like an abusive relationship. The writing is very simplistic. However, I felt like that was a deliberate choice because we are meant to be inside Annie's mind, and the way that her thoughts develop over the course of the book, basically her owner Doug has opted to have Annie's autonomy switched on. So this company are now offering people this option where their robots can start to think more like a human and essentially learn to become a human. Their minds start to feel more human. Like Annie's mind starts to feel more human as we're reading this book, like throughout the book, because she's learning and adapting, and it was so uncomfortable, but it's meant to be uncomfortable. I think this was very cleverly done. It's meant to be a commentary on the ethics of AI and what makes someone human. Like, if someone thinks like a human, does that mean that we should view them as a human? And yeah, I thought this was very cleverly written. I gave it 5 stars because I literally could not put it down. I listened to this while I was on holiday a few weeks ago. I think I'm always going to have this memory of lying on the beach listening to this audiobook and just being horrified. I know that some people were disappointed in the ending of this. I felt like the ending suited the tone of the book and I appreciated the ending. So yeah, that was actually, I think, my favourite book of the month, and this is a good place, I think, to wrap up this wrap up. So thank you for watching. If you made it this far, let me know in the comments what your favourite book was of January, and if you've read any of the books that I talked about in this video. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, and click subscribe if you would like to see more videos from me, but otherwise I will see you next time. Bye.